What do I do with that? Just say yes.
Yes, just do yes, and we'll begin.
Yes, I agree.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
So we're recording now, and I don't edit these videos, so we're just going to do a kind of a live broadcast here. I want to thank everyone for either tuning in live or actually watching this video after the date of the actual interview. But I'm Michael DiMartino, president of the Earthstock Foundation, dedicated to taking stock in people, planet, and the future. And I have the honor today of having a conversation today with Frank L. Kury, who more than 50 years ago was a state representative and later became a senator, Franklin L. Kury, who drafted and championed an environmental rights amendment to the Pennsylvania Constitution, and symbolically enough, passed on Earth Day of 1970. So welcome, Frank.
Thank you, Mike. Glad to be here.
So I do have to say, as prescribed, I did order your book. It's very dense. It's extremely informative and enlightening. And why don't we kind of start off about, so what came first, the chicken or the egg? Were you a state representative and then a senator and then you drafted this? Or did you originally have an interest in environmentalism and its relationship to the Constitution?
Well, no, nothing like that. Something like that. Let me tell you how this whole thing began. It began officially in 1966 when I announced that I was going to run for the House of Representatives in mid-state Pennsylvania. The seat was occupied by the senior Republican in the House, who was chairman of the House Appropriations Committee. And he was backed by a Republican patronage organization that pretty well controlled the county. And Democrats were very, very elected to anything. The only Democrat elected countywide was a veteran of the Bulge who lost part of his leg, and he got a lot of votes by walking around the county with his crutches and asking for it. But anyhow, Democrats didn't win. But what happened was, in a year before I announced, the state legislature voted on a bill to bring all of the coal companies totally under the Clean Streams Law. Prior to that time, the coal companies always had an exemption. So everybody else had to treat their discharges into the waters, but not the coal companies. So he voted no. The incumbent voted no. And the leader of the local sportsman's group, a gentleman named Bessie Beck, who I worked with for a year on the bill as a pro bono exercise for my law practice, said, "You run for the House and I'll be your chairman." Well, we did, and I ran on that issue, and I won. It was the upset of the year in Pennsylvania. My picture was in the newspapers in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, even though I was just in a small district in the middle of the state, because I became the first guy running for office who ran on an environmental issue. My issue was clean streams. And that was all I had in mind. I had no thoughts of the Constitution or anything else. I just wanted to get elected, which was the hard part because I had to beat the machine. But then I got in office and I was a little bit luckier. About the time I got elected, other people got the environmental issue. And by 1968, the Democrats and the environmental movement had taken over the House of Representatives. And I was assigned to the House Committee on Conservation, chaired by the state leader of the environmental group at that time, was John Laudadio, who was a Democratic representative from Westmoreland County and president of the State Federation of Sportsmen's Club. Well, I was assigned to his committee, and I worked very closely with him for the next few years. The environmental revolution hit Pennsylvania. People were sick and tired of what the steel companies, the coal companies, the railroad companies had done to our state. They raped it for environmental purposes. And the legislature and the people, I say the people first because that's legislatures come after that. But the people were furious because television and the news media put more and more focus on what had happened to our environment in the century since the Civil War. So we passed at the advantage I had was I was in the middle of all this legislation. All the whether I or Laudadio and author, which was not that much, all the legislation came through our committee, so I got to see it as a lawyer and look it over.
Well, I'll have to say, as someone who was born in 1966, you were doing amazing work well ahead of the curve. And as we can see now with like the COP conference that just happened in Scotland, now the impacts of climate change, and that people are talking about, demantling the coal industry and a lot of these other horrific industries that have decimated our environment. I just want to compliment you for, really being ahead of the curve and being really at this nexus point as people started to wake up to the importance of a clean environment.
Well, Mike, that's a good way to put it. But let me just finish very briefly how I got to the constitutional amendment. I was lucky enough to graduate from a first-class law school, University of Pennsylvania Law School, where I had studied constitutional law. So as I watched all these bills go through our committee, it really hit me. Now, wait a second. These bills were passing easily now. The public's for them. But in a few years, they could be repealed or undermined. We need something more permanent. And that's when my law school education and my background came into effect. I said, wait a second. We need a constitutional amendment to put some permanence into all this. So that's when, in the winter of 1968 and 69, I put together what is now Article 1, Section 27. I introduced it in the spring of 1969, and it went through 5 amendments. As I introduced it, it first went through the House where the Speaker wanted it changed. We had another change there, and then went to the Senate, and the Senate made 3 changes in it. Then they came back to me, and the question was in the House, should we approve these amendments? Well, I looked them over and I thought they were all right. I didn't think they did anything contrary to what I was hoping for. And in fact, in some ways, they improved it. So if you look at the book, in the appendix, you'll see the full Earth Day 1970 Journal of the House of Representatives, where the first Earth Day, and Gaylord Nelson, the founder of Earth Day, was the speaker. But before he spoke, I was called upon to move that the state House approve the Senate amendments, which I did. And then the Republican leader of the House Conservation Committee, Bill Wilt, seconded it. So that means the bill was in a position to be taken to the voters. So it passed the next session. I had to go through 2 sessions. I introduced it again in January of 1970, and it passed very, very quickly. In fact, it was passed by both houses and put on the ballot in May of 1971, May 18th. And that's when it passed. It passed by a 4-to-1 margin, 1,200,000 votes, I think, to about 250,000. It was stunning. There were 4 other amendments on the ballot. The only one that was even close was women's rights, and I kid my wife about that, but because we're all for that, but that only got a 2-to-1 approval by the voters. And the reason for the environment got 4-to-1 was because the public was really angry at what the coal companies had done to our state, and the steel companies and the railroad companies. So that's how I come on to books, and here we are. The thing I like about, you mentioned climate change, I'm very pleased because this amendment is drafted so that it can't have an impact on climate change. And we could talk about that, but I could go on, but that tells you how the amendment went on the ballot and how we got it approved in 1971.
So once it passed, what were the ramifications to the coal industry and to the environment in general, not just in Pennsylvania, but how that kind of amplified or didn't amplify into a national awareness and the ability to have impact on a national and federal level?
Well, I don't think it had enough impact outside the state. Inside the state, it got off to a slow start because the courts ruled that the test for whether something had violated the environmental amendment was a so-called Payne, P-A-Y-N-E, versus Kassab, K-A-S-S-A-B, Payne versus Kassab test, which had nothing to do with the text of the amendment, but it was really a balancing test. Did your activities affect the environment, and if so, did the benefits outweigh the damages? And it's kind of put a damper on things here for a while until 2013, when Justice Castile wrote the opinion in the Robinson Township case, where he said the courts have to read the English language, and we take the amendment at face value. And with that, they threw out 2 sections of the oil and gas law, and it moved on from there. So I can tell you now it's alive and well. Now, the immediate impact on the coal companies was it just reinforced what we had passed bills regulating the coal companies, but during that time, I was telling you, 1968 to 1970, 72, we passed the strip mining law. We passed the coal mining discharge clean streams law. So the coal companies were really now had to file just like anybody else. If you want to put something into the water, you got to get a permit from the state. And you got to show you're not going to do anything harmful to the streams or to the environment.
Well, it's interesting because not to overly politicize this, but I think we can see through the last 20, 30 years of different administrations, the people they've brought into the EPA have had varying polarities of opinions. And even during the last Trump administration, the removal of protections on a lot of on forests and wildlife lands, even the discussion about opening up the Arctic refuge. So in what you did in Pennsylvania, do you see now that there was a federal impact, and how does that play into setting out a precedence for other federal agencies like the EPA, or even what's happening right now with different things that are happening in relationship to wrongdoers in the relationship to industry and the environment?
Well, the fact is we need an amendment like Article 1, Section 27 in the federal Constitution. The federal Constitution is silent on it. It doesn't say a word about the environment explicitly. Now, there is a lawsuit brought by our Children's Trust in Oregon, the so-called Juliana case, which our Children's Trust brought, and that is arguing that we have a right to a decent environment under the Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which says that nobody's life, liberty, or property may be taken without due process of law. Well, that case has gone on for several years, and the problem with it is it's not explicit. The lawyer for the case, Julia Olson, is arguing that it's implicit, and she's probably right, but the courts haven't seen it so far that way. So now we have to, we need an explicit amendment to the U.S. Constitution. And that's what I'd like to see happen.
Well, it might be the perfect storm right now, because I think we can see currently with the current administration, Biden administration, they've committed really over, I believe, 1 point something trillion to climate change, and that applies to industry. And I know they're rolling out, originally they called it the New Green Deal, and there's a lot of initiatives being taken around infrastructure, but perhaps, and again, without being too political, how do you see the potential of this doorway of opportunity right now with the current administration putting such a focus on the environment and infrastructure and becoming more green?
Well, I don't know. I think it's going to be hard to pass the amendment, but I think we got to put it in and try it. They got to push for it, because look, what you mentioned about Trump and Obama's executive orders and all the regulations. Trump undid what Barack Obama accomplished through trying to, for example, on the Paris Peace Treaty, Paris Climate Accord. He pulled out of that. All the work that Kerry and Obama put into that went shot to hell. And pardon me for being so blunt about it, but this is why we need a federal amendment. When I wrote this book, I came to California and interviewed a number of people, including Ann Carlson, who is a well-known professor at UCLA, environmental law professor. And she said to me, the problem is now you get too much undulation in the implementation of these laws. And Trump proved that. You go up and then you're down. Now, Biden's taking us back, but we need an amendment to keep it. Certain fundamental principles stay there forever and should not be subject to all these political waves.
Right, especially when we start looking at the power of certain groups to have a effect with lobbying and super PACs, and how there's a lot of people that are, fighting against.
Right.
So for people who are watching this video, these types of concepts and ideas and legislations can be very complex. So what would it look like if we were to put forward some sort of national constitutional amendment? Because what's interesting right now, a lot of places around the world are actually passing these rights of nature legislations where, like, rivers have rights and waterways have rights, and pristine parts of forests or jungles have rights. So for people who are watching this, what would that look like to try to actually initiate something at this level? If you could break it down in kind of a simple terms for people to understand, what would it take to do that?
Well, first of all, the amendment itself should be fairly simple. If you look at Article 1, Section 27, and it's in the book, it's only 3 sentences. And that's important because you want something, that's right. You look at that book, you find page 5, you have the text of the amendment, Article 1, Section 27. And the first thing you got to remember, getting an amendment passed is a political action. It takes politics to do it, so you want something the public understands. And one of the things that pleases me the most about Article 1, Section 27 is how many people know about it and are embracing it when they talk to legislators, anyhow. So we need something like Article 1, Section 27. They can put the same thing in and hold hearings and maybe change it. But then we got to get somebody in the House and or the Senate to introduce it in the Congress. And then it's got to go through the 2/3 of the members of each House. Then it goes through 3/4 of the states have got to approve it. So what we got to do is get somebody to introduce it. Now, I am talking now to a congressman in Pennsylvania, and I can't reveal any names yet, but I'm hoping we'll have something on that in the near future. But there's no reason why you can't talk to some people in California or Colorado about doing the same thing. They don't have to wait for us.
Well, it's really interesting. Part of the formation of our Earthstock Foundation as a nonprofit organization, again, dedicated to taking stock in people, planet, and the future. And more and more, I think we can see, like Greta Thunberg and other, that the youth of the world are waking up to the devastation and to the nightmare they're inheriting as we change from fossil fuels and old archaic technologies into more green technologies, more appropriate technologies. So I think what's interesting is that there more and more I can see that there's a political will for that. So that kind of helped us to establish it. One of the things we're trying to do right now with the foundation is called the Sacramento River Watershed Project, because in California, which is the world's 5th largest economy due to agriculture and Silicon Valley and tech and such, shipping, supply chains, but secondly, is helping to not just protect the water there, but also to remediate and clean up the water. And as we know, and you're probably aware of, the Chicago Exchange just about a year ago declared water a commodity, and probably one of the most valuable commodities that there is, because no water, no life, and all systems break down. So we're doing a lot to help protect the water, but also as part of that, and that's a legislative and litigational nightmare, I will say that, especially when we come up against things like the proposed Delta Tunnel project, where they want to drain 50% of our aquifer from the state line of Oregon and Mount Shasta all the way to Sacramento and send that down to Central Valley, to Southern California, but also for the benefit of a few very small agricultural, I call them agrogarchies, just huge commercial farms. And it's really devastating small farms, but also trying to remediate it, because in California, one of the things that we're suffering from is due to the lack of permacultural techniques and organic agriculture. The watershed and the surface water and groundwater has all been contaminated with insecticides, pesticides, farm runoff, also from livestock. And not only that, but really over the last few years, the amount of fire retardants and forever chemicals that have been being used out there to put out these incredible, horrific wildfires has really destroyed California's water. So that's some of what we're doing on a day-to-day basis to bring more awareness that, water is life. We have to protect it, but we also, in protecting it, we also have to clean up. So how does, in your work, how does the idea of water, and again, we know that there are bad players in industry, but how does that reflect as far as water and how that would potentially parlay into some sort of federal constitutional protections?
Well, in Article 1, Section 27, the first sentence is that the people of Pennsylvania have a right to clean air and pure water. That's in the amendment. So that gives everybody a right to clean streams. So that's how it's part of it. And water, that's what got me into politics, was running against the guy who voted against keeping the coal companies out of the Clean Streams Law. So it's the key to it. And let me ask you this: besides the federal amendment, why doesn't California? This is the question I want to ask for the group. Why does California not have an environmental amendment? If you look at my book and the appendix, we went to great lengths to list every state in the union as to what their constitutional amendment looks like on the environment. Pennsylvania is the first one. Hawaii's pretty good. Montana's strong. New York just adopted an amendment last week. But California, the only thing in the California Constitution on the environment gives people a constitutional right to fish. Now, I'm an old fisherman. I'm for that. But my God, why don't I everything else? And California is so progressive in so many ways. Why doesn't California have a constitutional amendment?
Well, I will just guess. One of my collaborators, Bob Saunders, has been involved in the political arena around water and environmental justice and social justice for a long time. He wasn't able to make the call today. I'm sure we'll probably have a future dialogue, but I think a lot of it is just the power of the lobby at the Capitol in Sacramento, because between the agricultural industry, between the petroleum, the industry, fracking. I mean, and as much as I like aspects of our current Governor Newsom, and going back to Jerry Brown, he also penned out the putting in of 3,000 more fracking sites across the state, which we know has a horrific effect on groundwater and surface water quality and public health. So when we start to dissect all of these different interests and impacts of these huge corporations and their bottom line, let's say, profit over people, and it's a really sad reality. I think we can start to understand what we're trying to push up against, and that's really what inspired me too about having this phone call with you today, because I think there is a renewed potentiality to do that, and talking with you and getting a better understanding of that, and possibly utilizing some of your advisorship with some of my high-level constituency who knows how to do things on a more legislative level. Maybe we can amplify our pushback and make some progress. But it is really sad, even the impact to indigenous communities just in California, the timber industry, again, the petroleum industry, now the commodification of California's water. I mean, right now I'm in Colorado, where just where I am by Great Sand Dunes National Monument, the Rio Grande River is almost dry. And yet that's the water that goes down into New Mexico and into Arizona that feeds into the Colorado River and is such an important water source. So I think why I'm bringing this up is, we have to innovate and create new solutions. The environment, the world is changing rapidly, and we can't
Absolutely.
do something that worked yesterday and think it's going to work today. And again, you were so far ahead of the curve. It's been really inspiring to get to have time with you today to get to understand these things more and see what we can actually implement here in California.
Well, let me suggest this. No matter what the odds are, you must have somebody in the House and the Senate who is very environmentally active and pro environment. You can get to start the ball rolling by introducing the amendment. Get the thing in the hopper. That gives you something to get behind and talk about. But you need to get somebody to put it in. They could take my amendment and they could write any language they want. But the thing, you need three basic principles in the environment. One is a declaration that every human being, or at least a citizen of the state, if you're going by state, has a right to a decent, healthy environment. That's a fundamental human right. The UN's pushing that, but you got to do state by state here unless we go federal. But anyhow, that's the first sentence. The second sentence is that the public natural resources of the state, that is the water, the air, and the scenic and values of the state, all that is the public trust. And the third thing is makes the state and local governments trustees for this natural resource trust for future generations. Those are the three principles you want in the amendment. And if you get a legislature to introduce that, at least you have something to get behind and start talking about. The odds may be against it, but you got to start.
How did you
Well,
trust?
Well, I'll tell you what, I feel really inspired. I would love to, I'm not sure what the protocol would be to get a copy of this amendment you're talking about. And then, because I do have a very large network and constituency of people I work with, part of our foundation is not only do we work with individuals, nonprofits and NGOs, but we also work with members of tribal and indigenous communities. And we also work with, decision makers and policymakers. So again, that's part of the reason I felt really inspired. We live in an age of such information saturation. You go online, there's so much to look at. But with this series that we're doing as part of Earthstock Foundation called Solutionaries, we're really trying to get working templates that can be utilized to actually make change. I mean, we can talk about things, we can complain about things, but as you know, with your success there in Pennsylvania, unless we put our actions where our mouth is, it's hard to really make change. So I would love to, see the amendment and get some advisorship. And then at some point, maybe have a discourse with some of the people I work with in California and see what progress we can make on that.
Well, look,
What's interesting.
It's in the book. Just go 5 pages back. You go back before you get to the title page. But it's after the title.
Got it.
You got it there. It says Constitution of Pennsylvania.
Yep.
That's it. Article 1, section natural resources in the public estate. Then that's it. So that's
okay.
You got it. Now, if you want to go back to the index and the appendix to the book, you'll see what every state has done on it. In California, Colorado, how they compare to Pennsylvania. But that's in the appendix. So what's your back that right? This is appendix number. Just a second. I'll tell you which appendix number it is.
I have to say I'm impressed in the book because you even have a list of different nations that recognize the right to a healthy environment, starting with Afghanistan and going all the way through the whole alphabet, ending with
we got
Zimbabwe.
That Professor Boyd at the University of Vancouver, who is the UN rapporteur on climate change. He had put that together and gave me the permission to use it. But if you look at Appendix 3, what happens in each state, that was prepared by me and my research assistant, Deborah Colson. You'll see that the Appendix 3, every state in the union and what is there. There's been a change. New York adopted something last week. But other than that, I don't think there are any changes in the states. Right. Anyhow, that's what you got to push. And it's like, when I did it, the environmental tide was at its height in Pennsylvania. And I was a politician enough to know a tide when I see one, a political tide when I saw one.
Yeah.
If we're ever going to do an amendment, it's now. So we did it and it's in. Now, I don't know what we could do today, but times are different. When I did this, there was no mention of of climate change. Nobody thought of it. Nobody thought of Marcellus shale or fracking. That was unheard of when we did this. But the language, one of the reasons you want a broad principles statement in the amendment is so it lives forever, can be applied to almost anything. It's relevant. If if I had drafted this specifically about the coal industry, it said it wouldn't mean anything today. But it's in broad language. This is a fundamental thing I learned in constitutional law class. A broad statement is going to last a lot longer, have more impact, like the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. So I could go on, but that's my.
Well, let's do this. This is a really fascinating conversation, and I know you're still highly engaged and doing a lot of work. And I think at some point in the future, I'm going to get together more of a roundtable of people that have a discourse with you. I will say on April 22nd, I am doing a global Earth Day broadcast where I tend to bring in, the last one we did was on World Water Day, and we brought in over 50 different voices of people from indigenous communities to legislators to activists to educators to nonprofits talking about water on World Water Day. So we are planning something on Earth Day. It's going to be it's Friday, April 22nd and Saturday, April 23rd. But we are going to be doing a whole roundtable and global broadcast, slightly different format than this, where I get more private time to ask you questions. But I would love to keep the discourse going, and I'm very honored to have this time with you and to get to know more about your book, The Constitutional Question to Save the Planet. I think this is so spot on and so pertinent, and just the idea that people do have a right to a healthy environment, and besides constitutional right, it really is it's a God-given right, and not to sound religious or esoteric about it, but it's something that is part of our divine inheritance as being a human being. And then we see some of these things that are happening around the world. What happened in Michigan to the water there and to the community is just horrific. I mean, we just had a huge oil spill in the Bay of Los Angeles that had huge impact, and on and on. We just see where this concept of profit over people seems to be the mantra or the ethos for a lot of these big corporations. But like you said, this is a kind of excuse the pun, a watershed moment where we can really create some change. And now that more and more of the world is becoming aware of climate change and human impact on the environment, hopefully we can use that as some sort of fuel to get more momentum for accelerated change. And I want to thank you for your work and the inspiration of your work and success and your book. And I want to encourage people, how can they, if they want, how do they find their book? And do you have a website?
No, well, the book is published by the Environmental Law Institute of Washington, which is the premier environmental law publisher in the country. And you can get the book, so far you can go to Amazon. And by the way, the publisher was very good. I said, I want this thing priced, anybody can buy it. Some books get 60, 70 bucks. No. They brought it in at $19.95. So you can get it by going to Amazon, or you can go to the the customer service office of the West Academic Publishing Company. And I can give you their phone numbers because you can order quantities there too. Their number, and just a second, read it to you here, is 888. Okay, but I'm sorry. It's 877-888-1330.
Great.
That's the West Academic customer service. You can buy books to them or directly through Amazon for $19.95. And I'm not making any money on it. I don't get any profit on it. So
well, I'll tell you, I will say this. I don't want to make any empty promises, but maybe through our nonprofit, we'll get it together to buy a couple boxes of books and help get some more of this incredible information out to people, because a lot of people are not aware that they do have the tools and the power to make change. And sometimes it's hard as we watch, a lot of the bad news of corporate media, people can really feel depressed or defenseless and just disempowered to make change. It's like, well, what can I do? And the fact that you're one person that has done a lot to make a very positive change in your state and inspire others is really incredible story. So if you could put April 22nd on your calendar, I'm sure we'll talk before then.
Do that.
And I'd like to put together a little roundtable about, the Constitution and the environment, and we can have some discourse with a very educated, well-rounded team of people. But again, thank you, Frank, so much for your time, and I appreciate it. And just taking time out of your day to have this conversation so we can help inform more people.
Well, I think it's very important, Mike, and I want to compliment you and their stock for what you folks are doing. I think you got to try. It's going to be uphill, but look, the climate change is banging on our heads. We got to just wake up as a country.
Yeah, even this morning I was watching the news about the Pineapple Express atmospheric river that just hit the northwest of BC, Oregon, and Washington. And I mean, the devastation is horrific. And not only that, we're looking at things like sea level rise. There's so many things, these superstorms, the droughts, the fires.
Look at the forest fires in California. By the way, in chapter 8 on the climate change, the first interview I did was with Sean Norman, who's the chief of District 3 of the California Forest Fighters organization under the state government. He is in charge of District 3, which is a lot of Northern California. His interview there was stunning on how climate change is causing all these forest fires. So that's just we went to great lengths to make this book have a lot of information. In the appendix, I think, is very important because it has in there every state union, it has internationally, it has, among other things, it also has all the federal amendments that have been offered, and it even has a complete copy of the Green New Deal. So,
wow.
I'm not advocating particularly the whole Green New Deal, but I put it in there. So if you want to know what it is, it's all right there. It's complete text. So that's
wow.
The book's meant to be a toolbox for citizens.
I can see that, and that's why I was so anxious to get a copy of myself. So again, if you're just catching this part of the video, I'm Michael DiMartino, president of Rock Foundation, dedicated to helping to take stock of people, planet, and the future. And we do that through preservation, innovation, and regeneration. So I'm very honored to have this time. And again, we're talking about with Frank L. Kury about his book, The Constitutional Question to Save the Planet. And we're very honored to have you on the show, Solutionaries, today. I will get you a copy of the video. And again, thank you so much for your time. A world of respect and appreciation for all the work you've done and you still are doing.
Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate that. And I'll be glad to work with you in any future meetings you want to have. Call me, we'll set it up. I'll be glad to cooperate.
Absolutely. And tell your wife, thank you for having this time to speak with you. We do appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Very sweet of him.